Hi, history students. We're going to continue on with 2-3 today. We're going to be doing Legacy of Two Pharaohs. But before we start, I want to read this part the way it was. It's a focus on everyday life, and it's about cats, which I love. I have a black cat. I have an orange cat. So we're going to read about cats in ancient Egypt. Cats in ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, cats were loved and even worshipped. Egyptians valued the ability of wild cats to protect villages' grain supplies from mice and rats. Over several hundred years, cats became tame, and their role developed from valued hunter to adored family pet to goddess. In ancient Egyptian tombs, archaeologists have found many wall paintings, carvings, and statues of cats. Often the statues were adorned with beautiful jewelry, such as silver or gold earrings, nose rings, and collars. When an Egyptian family's cat died, its owners shaved their eyebrows to show their grief and had the cat's body mummified. Egyptians worshipped cats because they associated them with the goddess Bastet. She represented motherhood, grace, and beauty, and often appears in paintings and statues as a woman with the head of a cat. That's kind of some cool information. You won't be asked about that, but I just kind of liked it. All right, to today's reading, The Legacy of Two Pharaohs. Akhenaten tried to change Egypt's religion, while Tutankhamun is famous for the treasures found in his tomb. So many of us have heard about King Tut, right? So we're going to read a little bit about him today, not much. About 1370 BC, Amenhotep came to the throne. With the help of his wife Nefertiti, Amenhotep tried to lead Egypt in a new direction. A religious reformer, Amenhotep realized that Egypt's priests were gaining power at the expense of the pharaohs. In an attempt to maintain his own power, Amenhotep introduced a new religion that swept away the old gods and goddesses. Instead, only one god, called Aten, was to be worshipped. When Egypt's priests resisted these changes, Amenhotep removed many of their positions, seized their lands, and closed temples. He then changed his name to Akhenaten, which means spirit of Aten. He began ruling Egypt from a new city. To most Egyptians, Akhenaten's attacks on the gods seemed to be an attack on Egypt itself. They refused to accept Aten as the only god. Meanwhile, Akhenaten became so devoted to his new religion that he neglected his duties as pharaoh. The administrators he appointed were not as experienced as the priests they replaced, and Akhenaten took no action when enemies from what is now Turkey, the Hittites, attacked Egypt. As a result, Egypt lost most of its lands in Western Asia, greatly shrinking the empire. So he was so focused on changing the religion of the country that he didn't protect it from the Hittites, who were invaders. All right. The boy king. When Akhenaten died, his son-in-law inherited the throne. The new pharaoh, Tutankhamun, was a boy about 10 years old. Think about that, you guys. He is a year younger than most of you, some of you 2 years younger. 10 years old, he's in charge of all of Egypt. He relied on help from palace officials and priests, who convinced him to restore the old religion. After ruling for only 9 years, so he's only 19 at this point, Tutankhamun died unexpectedly. He may have suffered a fall or been murdered. No one is sure. What is certain is that King Tut, as he is nicknamed, played only a small role in Egypt's history. Why then is he the most famous of all pharaohs? The boy king captured people's imaginations after a British archaeologist, Howard Carter, found his tomb in AD 1922. The tomb contained the king's mummy and incredible treasures, including a brilliant gold mask of the young pharaoh's face. Carter's find was a thrilling discovery, because most royal tombs in Egypt were looted by robbers long ago. And so here is that mask, right, that they're talking about. And most of us have seen that at some point. Okay. The end of the New Kingdom. Under Ramses II, Egypt regained territory and built great temples, but the empire fell by 1150 BC. During the 1200s BC, pharaohs worked to make Egypt great again. The most effective of these pharaohs was Ramses II. He reigned for a remarkable 66 years. That is a really long time. From 1279 BC to 1213 BC. During this time, Egyptian armies regained lands in Western Asia and rebuilt the empire. Ramses also launched an ambitious building program, constructing several major new temples. That's the Temple of Karnak. He didn't build that one, I don't believe, but it's pretty cool. Biography. So here's a little bit more about our friend Ramses II. Ramses II reigned 1279 to 1213 BC. Ramses II began his military training at a very young age. Ramses' father, Seti I, allowed his 10-year-old son to serve as a captain in his army. Imagine that. Seti also made his son co-ruler of Egypt. By the time Ramses was crowned pharaoh of Egypt, he was a great warrior and experienced leader. 9 kings who ruled after Ramses II named themselves in his honor. Many centuries later, archaeologists nicknamed the pharaoh Ramses the Great because of his fame on the battlefield, his construction and restoration of buildings and monuments, and his popularity among the Egyptian people. His subjects fondly called him Sesi, an abbreviation of Ramses. Ramses continued in his father's footsteps by trying to restore Egyptian power in Asia. In the early years of his reign, he defeated forces in southern Syria and continuously battled Egypt's longtime enemy, the Hittites. Remember them from earlier? Details about one costly battle with the Hittites were carved on temple walls, showing the Egyptians succeeding against great odds. During his 66-year reign, Ramses II undertook a large-scale building program. He could afford such an expensive plan because Egypt was very prosperous during his reign. He restored the Sphinx, he completed the Temple of Karnak, and built himself a city with 4 temples as well as beautiful gardens and orchards. He is famous for the temple built at Abu Simbel. It was carved out of a solid rock cliff and featured 4 huge statues of Ramses II. 2 on each side of the doorway. Ramses' first wife, Queen Nefertiti, died early in his reign. Like other pharaohs, Ramses had many wives. Ramses II was proud of his large family, which included more than 100 children. Sorry, guys. Got a little out of control. Why were temples built? Under Ramses II and other new kingdom rulers, scores of new temples rose throughout Egypt. Many were built by enslaved people captured in the war. The most magnificent was Karnak at Thebes. Its huge columned hall, decorated with colorful paintings, still impresses visitors today. Unlike modern churches, temples, and mosques, Egyptian temples did not hold regular services. Instead, most Egyptians prayed at home. They considered the temples as houses for the gods and goddesses. Priests and priestesses, however, performed daily temple rituals, washing statues of the deities and bringing them food. The temples also served as banks. Egyptians used them to store valuable items such as gold jewelry, sweet-smelling oils, and finely woven cloth. Egypt's decline and fall. After Ramses II, Egypt's power began to fade. Later, pharaohs had trouble keeping neighboring countries under Egyptian control. Groups from the Eastern Mediterranean attacked Egypt by sea, using strong iron weapons. The Egyptians had similar arms, but they paid dearly for them because Egypt lacked iron ore. Remember, they were using stones and copper mostly. By 1150 BC, the Egyptians had lost their empire and controlled only the Nile Delta. Beginning in the 900s BC, Egypt came under the rule of one outside group after another. The first conquerors were the Libyans from the west. Then, in 760 BC, the people of Cush, we read about them earlier, a land to the south, seized power and ruled Egypt for the next 70 years. Finally, in 670 BC, Egypt was taken over by the Assyrians. We've seen the Assyrians before, right? They were in the Mediterranean, in the Euphrates Valley. So when you go to do your work today, please use the book. It's really important that you use the book because it's about vocabulary. Primarily, it's about vocabulary. And you want to be able to look up those words. Please don't guess on them. Okay, part of practicing to get better, to understand them, to know them, so that you're prepared for the test is actually doing the work. So please look through the text for, even if you're sure you know the word and you're sure you know what it means, please still look it up. Double check yourself. Okay, just check it and go, aha, I had it right. Okay, but please look it up. Okay, take your time. Each definition only has one term. Each term only has one definition. Okay, don't double anything up. So be very careful about what you do when you're doing your work today. All right, and with that, I hope you have a good afternoon, and I will see you tomorrow.